In the first presidential debate last week, the candidates presented many disagreements on key issues that will decide the election in November. However, one of the topics that both candidates addressed economically was outcompeting China. Here's what President Trump said about each administration's differences in their strategies.
I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because there was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation.
Joining me now to discuss the right plan of action is Senior Vice President of Governmental Affairs at Americans for Responsible Innovation, Satya Thallam. Satya, welcome to the show.
Hi, Stacy. Good to be with you.
I'm glad you're here because this was one of the, to me, spicier moments of the debate because candidate Harris, Vice President Harris, didn't actually have a response as to why the Biden administration hasn't removed those mean old dastardly tariffs that mean old President Trump put on.
Well, I think what you saw reflected in the debate, even though they didn't put it in these terms, that President Trump established a new consensus. We all agree that we are in a existential competition with China. This is both economic. This is both national security. This involves our allies around the world, and of course, the Biden-Harris administration isn't going to put it in those terms. But President Trump was right. They didn't remove those tariffs. In fact, in some cases, they actually doubled down on them.
So the doubling down is the interesting part. And I was watching CNBC where they had a little bit of a round robin discussion and they had two economists on. One was arguing that the tariffs can't really be a strategy that works. And the other economist was saying the tariffs are not a blanket strategy, but rather they have to be used as a negotiating tactic. And the example that he gave had to do with us not selling GM and other American made vehicles in Europe or Japan while they sell their vehicles here. So they provide robust competition to the American-made vehicles that really before all of that importation, Americans were perfectly happy and satisfied with only American-made cars. So he said you
Mhm.
can raise the tariffs to match theirs, and then when they say, well, you can't put 100% tariff on a Mercedes-Benz, then you say, actually, we're going to match the tariff that you have on GM cars. If you lower the tariff on GM cars, then we will lower the tariff on the Mercedes and so on and so forth, because there's a lot of cars that we've gotten used to driving. Americans don't really want to give up on them, but it'd be great to sell some of ours over there.
Yeah, I think this is the core of the issue, and this is how I see it. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have any tariffs, right? And that would lead to lower prices. But we live in the real world. In the real world, the United States has the right, has the prerogative, in fact, the duty to say, if you don't play by our rules, you don't get access to our market. And we're allowed to use our role as a major economy, as one of the largest buyers in the world, both our government directly, but obviously our consumer base, and say, you don't get free access to that unless you do things like stop stealing our intellectual property, stop imposing reciprocal tariffs, as you noted, for certain goods. And I think you mentioned the CNBC roundtable. I think the second economist is right. The end goal is not to establish tariffs, trade barriers, and then just set it and forget it and say that's the world. The idea is to use it as leverage to get those change, ultimately to get the changes that we want to see other people play by the rules. And I think further, we should look to using Europe and ourselves as kind of one buyer and say, hey, you can sell to China by their rules, or you can sell to us using our democratic values and the rules that we set, and use that as even further leverage. But I think that economist is right. I mean, the idea is to get to a world where we can trade freely. But if other countries don't want to play by those rules, we don't live in that world.
Yeah, first off, I just love the fact that you're talking about the real world versus the utopian ideal that we would all love. There are a lot of things that in a perfect world I would so jump on like right away. Like I would be so happy to see. But I've never seen those conditions actually exist. I mean, for one or two people, these conditions might exist. They're one-offs. But in the real world, for most of us, it's as you've described human nature is such that we will take advantage of the leeway that we're given. And the foreign countries take advantage of America because they know Americans, we like variety and we like luxury. So they provide that to us, but they don't give us an opportunity to sell our vehicles on their market, which leads to less creativity and variety here in our market. I don't see American car makers making a wide variety of vehicles that are outside of the norm for Americans because they only sell to Americans. I
Hmm.
believe GM and Ford would make cars of different shapes, of different functions. If they had to deal with the European market, if they had to deal with the Middle Eastern market, or even, let's dream big here, the Chinese market. Can you imagine what
Hmm.
kind of cars would come out of the response from Chinese people who are buying American made cars and giving their feedback? So it's not just the car market where tariffs have been known to make a real difference. President Trump is talking about other things that we import from China. And some of these industries, Satya, should actually be restarted here. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the Nippon Steel deal, where you have it's Japan. They want to
Hmm.
purchase Nippon Steel. I think it's an absolutely terrible idea to sell US steel to a foreign country, even a close ally like Japan. They're obviously our ally. We love the country, we work well together. But I still think that the steel company should be owned by the United States.
Well, and picking up on a point that you made there, I mean, living in the real world means we have to level with the American people, and that's what leadership is. Ultimately, you don't get to say and do everything that everyone wants. You have to acknowledge that there are brutal dictators around the world. There are autocrats. There are elements like the Chinese Communist Party that are uh, that are fighting every day to basically eat our lunch, right? And so I think what President Trump acknowledged, and again, what is the new consensus, is that sometimes we may, in the short and near term, have to pay slightly higher prices in one way, or may have fewer options on certain goods. But in the long term, this is going to be an American business. American interests are furthered, and that's the responsibility of the president, is to serve American interests above any other interest. On the steel deal, I'm not an expert specifically on the steel industry. I think we have always, though, questioned and im- im- imposed scrutiny on major transactions that involve critical industries, critical infrastructure. So we've had this scrutiny when foreign interests wanted to buy a major U.S. port, because we knew that even if it was an ally, if something happened, we would lose a critical infrastructure element that is necessary for our entire economy to run. So it's okay for us to say we need to take a second look. I'm not going to judge that deal uh, in a binary sense because I'm not an expert on it, but I don't see any issue with raising it as a concern, even if it is an ally that's taking interest in the company.
Yeah, I agree. And so the issue here is not that we don't trust Japan. It's that US steel, believe it's either US or USA steel, that was the primary source of steel when we went to World War II. They cranked out the steel that was needed to build not just warships, but planes and bombs that helped us to win that conflict.
Yeah.
We still have those kinds of needs. We still need to build tanks and aircraft and all kinds of things out of steel. Offshoring the ownership of that could also place us at a disadvantage if steel orders out of Japan would supersede our own and their orders were filled before ours and we were in a critical need for new equipment, which I foresee it's not even on the horizon. It's happening right now because we are emptying our stockpile of old military weaponry into Ukraine. So we need to refill that. And all of those items are comprised of steel.
Yeah, it's a critical base element to so many other industries, right? And so if you create a bottleneck there, if you create something where, as you point out, another country's interest would supersede ours, it's not just about who controls the steel market. It's about all the downstream products, all the critical, whether it's defense and industrial base, whether it's consumer goods, that are critical to our economy and critical to our national self-defense. We're seeing this now. I'm sure you're very familiar with critical minerals, right? Um, uh, the inputs that go
Satya,
into semiconductors.
yeah, and the point you're making is one that is well made. It's in the entirety of our critical infrastructure that we're seeing actually being offshored, and we need to get that back here. It's so great to have you here. I hope we can speak to you again, Satya Thallam from Response Americans for Responsible Innovation. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
All right, coming up in our Now News Roundup, just in time for the election, mortgage interest rates are down. We'll discuss up next.